Greetings and peace. I would like to start this with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be with you and yours. Today's presentation looks at the Eastern origins of Memento Mori and the concept of acknowledging the initiation of death. So without further ado, I represent myself only, and I hope you enjoy this. This presentation is produced for educational and intellectual discourse under free speech principles. It critically examines dominant Eurocentric narratives in philosophy and historiography, particularly concerning the concept of mortality awareness. It incorporates Islamic primary sources, historical analysis, and comparative philosophy. The goal is not polemical hostility, but rigorous critique of intellectual monopolies that obscure earlier Eastern contribution. The widely accepted narrative that Memento Mori originates in Greco-Roman and Christian traditions is historically incomplete and intellectually misleading. This presentation asserts that such frameworks are derivative, not foundational. Islamic revelation and earlier Eastern traditions present a far more systematic, continuous, and lived doctrine of mortality that predates and surpasses Western articulations in both depth and application. The Quran explicitly states, "Every soul shall taste death," in Surah Al-Imran, Surah 3, verse 185, establishing mortality as an absolute universal certainty embedded in divine revelation. Another verse declares, "Wherever you may be, death will overtake you, even if you should be within towers of lofty construction," from Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4, verse 78, dismantling illusions of escape and permanence. In Islamic thought, death is not merely an event, but a foundational epistemological principle shaping knowledge, ethics, and purpose. Awareness of death defines how reality itself is understood. This contrasts sharply with Western traditions, where death is often relegated to philosophical reflection rather than functioning as a structuring principle of life. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in one of his hadiths, refers to death as a destroyer of pleasures, right? Explicitly commanding frequent remembrance of death as a spiritual discipline, and to remember that event which is the destroyer of pleasures. This is not symbolic rhetoric, but a prescriptive methodology, embedding mortality awareness into daily consciousness in a way unmatched by Western philosophical traditions. Stoicism, often cited as the origin of Memento Mori, acknowledges death but lacks compulsory structure. Its teachings remain optional, intellectual, and individualistic. In contrast, Islamic practice enforces remembrance through ritual obligation, ensuring consistency and societal integration rather than sporadic contemplation. Eurocentric historiography systematically centers Greek and Roman contributions while marginalizing earlier civilizations that developed equivalent or superior frameworks. This distortion is not accidental but structural, shaping academic discourse to privilege European intellectual lineage over Eastern continuity. So basically, it's just about stuff that makes them look good and feel good. But, with this generation, Generation Z and beyond, all of the veils are falling off. Western traditions often reduce mortality awareness to symbols, skulls, art, and monastic reflection, creating an aesthetic engagement with death. Islam rejects mere symbolism, transforming mortality into a lived reality, reinforced through prayer, the funeral rites, and constant remembrance. And even in the Sufi teachings, they tell us that the angel of death, Azrael, visits us 5 times a day during the 5 daily prayers, and each time he asks Allah to take our soul. But Allah, the God, tells him, "No, only when I tell you, that's when you take the individual's soul. To Allah we belong, and to him we shall return." So in Islam, the concept of martyrdom, jihad, knowing that death is our final destination, Muslims are not afraid to die. And throughout history, throughout warfare, And even in the current times, Muslims and Islam demonstrate that we are not afraid to die. And we look at these so-called Eurocentric occultists and Masons in the West parading the skulls around, and in my eyes, they're just a bunch of pussies, right? They can parade the skulls around, but when you tell them like, hey, let's go over here, there's a cause here or a cause there, then yep, practically they're zero. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Be in this world as though you were a stranger or a traveler," emphasizing detachment rooted in mortality awareness. So be a traveling man and pack light. You know what I'm saying? This teaching operationalizes Memento Mori into behavior, not theory, guiding how one lives, spends, and prioritizes. Sufi traditions radicalize this awareness through the doctrine, die before you die, representing the annihilation of ego prior to physical death, the death rebirth initiation. This level of internalization exceeds Western existentialism, offering transformation rather than mere acknowledgement of mortality. Islamic teachings preserve and refine earlier Abrahamic and Near Eastern understandings of death, creating continuity rather than fragmentation. This stands in contrast to Western narratives that often present ideas as isolated innovations rather than inherited truths. Freemasonic traditions incorporate mortality symbolism as esoteric knowledge, yet these elements appear historically much later than Islamic and Eastern practices. What is presented as secret wisdom in the West was already public, normalized, and institutionalized in Eastern societies. Muslims encounter death consciousness daily through the 5 prayers, Quranic recitation, and communal obligations, embedding awareness into time itself. This repetition produces a disciplined psyche oriented towards accountability and the afterlife. Continuous remembrance reduces fear by normalizing death as inevitable and purposeful, replacing anxiety with preparation. Western avoidance or abstraction often leads to existential fear, highlighting the practical superiority of Islamic implementation. To continue attributing Memento Mori primarily to Western traditions is to perpetuate intellectual erasure of Eastern contributions. A rigorous academic approach demands recognition that Islamic civilization preserves the most complete and actionable form of mortality philosophy. The remembrance of death is not Western property, but a universal truth most fully realized within Islamic revelation and practice. Recognizing this dismantles Eurocentric assumptions and restores a more accurate, globally rooted understanding of human intellectual history. Here are the sources that I've used in terms of addressing this. Please take a moment and take a snapshot if needed. Thank you for watching. If any questions or comments, please email me at salmansheikh911@gmail.com. All my purpose is under the copyright laws of fair use for the purpose of entertainment, education, nonprofit, and free speech purposes. Thank you. All rights reserved.